Welcome to our deep dive into one of history's biggest mysteries, I guess you could say, the JFK assassination. You've provided a really interesting mix of materials, articles from Fair Play magazine, and declassified documents from the Assassination Records Review Board, all sorts of things. It's clear you're interested in really looking deeper at this and exploring all the questions that are still out there.
Yeah, and you're definitely not alone. The amount of material you've gathered really shows just how much interest there still is in the JFK assassination. It's a puzzle with a lot of pieces, and today we're going to try to put some of them together. We'll focus on what's the most interesting and thought-provoking stuff in what you gave us.
Okay, great. Sounds good. So, let's start with all this talk about these lost and found films. Fair Play talks about this film that CBS presented with a lot of hype, saying it was new evidence. But some JFK researchers like Jack White weren't that impressed.
Right.
He said he'd seen similar footage before, so it seems like CBS might have been exaggerating a little.
Yeah, that's right. Jack White, he's a longtime JFK researcher. He's known for being really careful with evidence. So when he has doubts about something, it's worth listening. Now, on the other hand, we have Richard Trask, who's a historian. He actually agrees with the Warren Commission's findings, and he said that this CBS film, even if it wasn't totally new, offered some good perspectives on what happened right after the assassination. So right away, we see this like back and forth, different people looking at the same evidence and seeing different things.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even when we're talking about something like film footage, it seems straightforward, but perspective really matters.
Absolutely.
And speaking of interesting footage, there's the story about Win Hamonic and his claims about having another 8mm film. That turned out to be a hoax.
Yes. The Win Hamonic case. It's fascinating. It shows just how complicated JFK research can be and how easy it is to fall into traps. Hamonic, he was a student at the time. He really went all out to create this big hoax, made up characters, fake film details, the whole 9 yards. But what's really strange is what he said when he confessed. He claimed he wanted to impress the team with his clever plot.
The team. That makes you wonder, right? What team was he talking about? Was this just a student prank, or was there something more organized happening?
It's a little unnerving to think that someone might be planting false information on purpose within these JFK research groups.
It definitely makes things more complicated, and it really highlights how important critical analysis is. We can't just believe everything we hear. We got to question sources, think about motives, and consider if someone might be trying to trick us. Absolutely. So moving on from those films, you also gave us a lot of documents that the Assassination Records Review Board dug up, specifically from the FBI and the CIA. These give us some insight into the investigations that were happening behind the scenes and the network of connections surrounding the assassination. For example, there's a report that mentions Marianne McCall. They describe her as a go-between for the Dallas police and the criminals in the city. What's interesting is she seemed to know more about the shooting of Oswald than she was letting on.
You've hit on a key detail there.
Yeah.
That comment she made to an FBI informant. You know how it works? It says a lot. It makes it seem like there was some agreement, some secret understanding that they weren't supposed to talk about. It feeds into the suspicion that powerful people knew more than they were saying.
Right. And then there's this document that shows the FBI was looking into Mike Payne's father, Payne. You might remember housed Oswald and his wife for a while. The FBI wanted to know if his father was part of some kind of subversive organization. It seems like they were looking everywhere, trying to find anything that could link Oswald to groups they considered dangerous.
Yeah, it really shows how intense the investigation was, and maybe how desperate they were. They were clearly looking for any explanation for Oswald's actions, anything that would fit with their story of him acting alone. And this brings us to one of the most interesting documents you gave us. It's a CIA document that mentions Project Oswald.
That's right. This document just mentions the name Project Oswald without any other explanation. It's like a clue that leads to nowhere. What was this project? What was it about? Was Oswald involved somehow? Was he a target? Or something else entirely? It's frustrating to have this piece of information with no context.
It definitely leads to a lot of speculation, and it's not the only time we see connections between Oswald and intelligence agencies. There's another document that shows that the FBI even considered Priscilla Johnson as a suspect. She's the author who interviewed Oswald in Russia.
Wow, imagine that. You go from interviewing someone to being a suspect in their assassination. That says a lot about the paranoia surrounding this investigation. They seem to see conspiracies everywhere, even within their own ranks.
And don't forget, all the information that's been blacked out in the released documents, these censored sections, these missing pieces of the puzzle, they just deepen the mystery and encourage people to speculate. It's like trying to read a book where half the pages are ripped out. You get a sense of the story, but you'll never know the whole thing.
Yeah, which of course makes you want to fill in the blanks, to imagine what they're hiding in those censored parts. It's
Yeah.
almost like the secrecy itself is creating more conspiracy theories.
That's a great point. The lack of transparency, the fact that they're withholding information, it creates a void. And people are going to fill that void with speculation and guesses. It's human nature to try and make sense of what we don't know, to connect the dots,
Yeah.
even if we have to draw some of them ourselves.
And sometimes those dots lead to some pretty interesting and maybe unsettling places.
Speaking of which, let's talk about some of the conflicting stories and alternative theories around the assassination. One of the biggest discrepancies is about the type of rifle they found at the Texas School Book Depository. At first, the police officers who found it said it was a 7.65 Mauser, which obviously doesn't match up with the official story.
Right. Later, they said it was a Mannlicher Carcano. That's the rifle they say Oswald used. And to add to the confusion, you found a new FBI document. It's about a 7.65 millimeter shell casing that was found in Dealey Plaza. But here's the crazy part. The document says they thought this evidence was useless and they destroyed it.
Destroyed. Wow.
Destroyed. That seems like a pretty big coincidence, don't you think? A shell casing that matches the first description of the rifle just disappears. It makes you wonder if someone was trying to tamper with the evidence to make sure it fit with the story they wanted to tell.
It's definitely a possibility, and it fits with a pattern we see in the JFK case. Important evidence often goes missing. It makes it really hard to separate fact from fiction. We have this destroyed shell casing, the missing bullet from the magic bullet theory, the limo that was quickly fixed up, the president's clothes being destroyed. It's a long list of missing pieces that makes it almost impossible to really know what happened.
It's like someone was trying to erase the past, to control the story by controlling the evidence. And then there's the whole debate about the double bang. All those people who said the last two shots sounded like they happened at almost the same time. This contradicts what the Warren Commission said. They concluded there was enough time between the shots for Oswald to have fired them all from the book depository.
The double bang is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that challenges the idea that Oswald acted alone. If those shots were as close together as people said, it raises some serious questions about whether he could have done it all himself. Was there another shooter? Was there another gun? These are questions that need more investigation.
And speaking of other guns, we have reports that suggest handguns were involved. There's a report from Deputy Sheriff Craig. He said he found a .45 caliber slug at the scene. And there's that story about a motorcycle cop who supposedly saw a similar slug roll off his fender during the shooting.
These stories, even if we can't confirm them, just add another layer of mystery. It suggests there might have been multiple shooters, or that what happened was more complicated than the official story says. And then we had this mysterious guy, Chauncey Holt. He claimed to be one of the tramps they arrested near Dealey Plaza.
Right. Holt was a former CIA agent. He said he was there to deliver fake IDs and handguns. His story is pretty fascinating. But like a lot of things in this case, it's hard to know if it's true. But you did find an FBI memo that seems to support at least part of his story.
Yes. This memo confirms that there was an illegal arms sale in Dallas the day before the assassination. And it includes this really creepy line, the operation would go ahead as soon as we take care of Kennedy. If this memo is real, it suggests there was definitely some kind of evil plan in motion.
It's a chilling thought to think about that. But who is behind this plan? Who are the key players? To get closer to those answers, we need to take a closer look at the lives of some of the most interesting people connected to this case. People whose roles and motives are still a mystery. And we'll do that in the next part of our deep dive.
So let's shift our focus now to some of these key players. Their connections and motivations are still a huge source of debate and speculation. And maybe no one is more mysterious than Jack Ruby, right? The guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald while he was in police custody.
Yeah, it's like burned into everyone's memory. That footage of Ruby lunging at Oswald with the gun, it just added to the chaos of the whole thing. But who is Ruby really? And what made him want to silence Oswald?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's been haunting researchers forever. On the surface, Ruby was just a Dallas nightclub owner, a bit of a showman. But underneath, there was a much more complicated and troubled guy with connections to the criminal world. And some people even think to intelligence agencies.
Right. And you've given me some interesting stuff that looks into those connections. One theory that keeps coming up is Ruby's involvement in gun running for those anti-Castro groups.
Exactly. There's evidence suggesting Ruby was involved in getting weapons to Cuba, trying to help overthrow Fidel Castro. And this connection to the anti-Castro movement adds another layer to his reasons for killing Oswald. Maybe he was protecting himself, or was he doing it for other people who were scared of what Oswald might say?
And then there's that account from Jack Elrod, Ruby's cellmate. He claimed that Oswald knew about Ruby's supposed gun running operation. If that's true, it connects them in a pretty incriminating way. It suggests there was planning and coordination, which really challenges the idea that Oswald was working alone.
Elrod's account, if we believe it, would be a huge piece of the puzzle. It makes you think that maybe both Oswald and Ruby were part of something bigger, pawns in a conspiracy that goes way beyond just one gunman.
Another name that keeps popping up in your research is David Ferry. This pilot with a pretty shady past, connections to the CIA, the mafia, and even to Clay Shaw, the businessman from New Orleans who was actually put on trial for conspiring to kill JFK, but he was found not guilty.
Ferry's one of those guys who just seems to embody all the darkness surrounding the JFK assassination. His ties to intelligence agencies, organized crime, and anti-Castro groups make him a top suspect for a lot of conspiracy theorists.
And then we have the story from Robert Morrow. He used to work for the CIA. He claims he gave Ferry modified Mannlicher rifles, the same kind officially linked to Oswald. That's a pretty serious allegation. Are there other sources that back up Morrow's story?
Morrow's story is definitely one of the more controversial pieces of evidence you've gathered. Some researchers believe it, others don't. We have to remember that Morrow has made other claims about his involvement in secret operations that people have questioned or disproven.
So we got to be careful with his claims. But even if we don't take everything he says as fact, the number of people involved in gun running who also knew Oswald or Ruby raises some serious concerns about the official story. It suggests a world where covert ops, organized crime, and feelings against Castro all came together. It's like the perfect environment for conspiracies to grow.
You've hit on a really important point. The official story focuses on Oswald as this lone wolf, a disgruntled ex-Marine who acted alone. But when you look at all the connections around him, it's hard to believe he was really isolated. It's almost impossible to ignore the fact that so many of the key players, Oswald, Ruby, Ferry, and others around them, were directly or indirectly connected to intelligence agencies, either the CIA or the FBI.
It's a pattern that's hard to miss. And it leads us to the question of a cover-up. You gave me information from a 1994 documentary that claimed there were plans in place for a media blackout if they ever found out about Kennedy's planned second invasion of Cuba.
If that's true, it's a big deal. It shows that the government was willing to manipulate information, to control the story in order to protect secret operations or powerful people. It makes you wonder about how transparent the investigation into Kennedy's death really was, and if they hid or changed parts of the official story on purpose to serve some secret agenda.
And of course, there are all the inconsistencies with the autopsy. The conflicting reports about how badly Kennedy's brain was damaged and that missing bullet.
The autopsy is a mess full of contradictions. You have different stories from the people who did the autopsy. They mishandled the president's body, and important evidence like his brain disappeared. These inconsistencies, plus the destruction of other key evidence, like the limo and the president's clothes, make people suspicious of a cover-up. It's like someone was trying to erase the past to make it impossible to really know what happened.
It's just a ton of inconsistencies and unanswered questions. And when you think about what was at stake, the assassination of a president during the Cold War, it's no surprise that people are still looking for the truth after all these years.
The JFK assassination isn't just something that happened in the past. It's a wound that hasn't healed. It represents a loss of innocence, a betrayal of trust in the people in power. And as long as these questions remain unanswered, that wound is going to keep hurting.
Man, it's a story that just sucks you in, makes you question everything you thought you knew. We've gone from grainy film and rumors to official documents and scary statements. Each one just adds to the mystery of the JFK assassination.
Yeah, and it's that complexity, that whole web of events and shady people.
So it keeps us coming back.
We want to make sense of the chaos, find some kind of order in this tragedy.
But the deeper we go, the more we realize there might not be a simple answer. We end up with these pieces, whispers of what could have been, and this feeling that we'll never really know the truth. It's like trying to see through a broken mirror. You get these glimpses, but you can't see the whole picture.
Right? It shows you how powerful these structures are, the forces that control history and often hide what they do. Even after all this time and all these documents, we still have more questions than answers. I think that's what makes this so compelling and so disturbing.
It makes you question your assumptions about the world, about who's really in charge and how they use their power. This deep dive into the JFK assassination has been a journey into those very questions. It reminds us that history is rarely as simple as the official stories would have us believe.
It's a journey that should make us think critically, to question the information we're given, and to look for different points of view. It's about understanding that there are often hidden agendas, motives, and power struggles happening behind the scenes. And those things shape the events we see.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, I'm curious, what's the most interesting part of all this for you? What would you keep digging into if you had the chance?
For me, it always comes back to those links with intelligence agencies and covert operations. The more we look, The more we see the CIA, the FBI, and other groups involved in what happened around the assassination.
You're right. You can't ignore the fact that Oswald Ruby Ferry and so many others around them were connected to these agencies. It makes you ask, to what degree were these people being used, influenced, or even controlled by the government?
That's a question we might never know the answer to for sure, but it's a question worth thinking about. A question that should inform how we view not only the JFK assassination, but the world in general.
Because this isn't just about history, is it? It's about understanding the powers that shape our lives, the hidden things that influence history and the way things are.
Absolutely. And for those listening, keep exploring the material you've got. See what stands out to you, what questions you're left with. The JFK assassination is a huge puzzle, and we can all play a part in trying to put it together, to search for truth and understanding.
This deep dive has been about peeling back the layers, seeing the complicated reality behind what seemed like a simple event. But it's also been about giving you, the listener, the power to keep searching, to dig deeper into the mysteries that still surround Kennedy's death.
Remember, critical thinking is the best tool we have. Question everything, explore different perspectives, and never give up on finding the truth. The answers, even if they're hard to find, are out there waiting for us.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.